The cold, sterile walls of cell block D7 held secrets darker than the space between stars. Inside, 12 prisoners from different corners of the galaxy huddled in their separate cells, each waiting for what they believed would be their final week alive. The prison, situated on a stormy moon of gas giant Kepler-4, was known throughout the galaxy as the last stop for the condemned. In cell 42, Blue, a tall crystalline being from the Rigel system, traced patterns in the condensation on his cell wall. His crystalline body, once gleaming with inner light, had dulled during his 6-month stay. Like the others, he had been convicted of crimes against the Galactic Council, in his case, alleged weapons smuggling to rebel forces. The cell block's silence broke as Guard Captain Smith made his rounds, his heavy boots echoing against the metal floor. The human guard was one of the few of his species working in the facility, most positions being filled by robots or members of the Council's dominant species. "Did you hear?" whispered Rock, a stocky silicon-based life form in the adjacent cell. "They're bringing in the human executioner." Blue's crystal structure vibrated with fear. Everyone had heard of the human executioners. Unlike the automated execution systems used for standard cases, human executioners were brought in for high-profile prisoners, or those considered especially dangerous. "I heard he's executed prisoners from 50 different species," hissed Wind, an ethereal gas-based being contained in a special pressure chamber 3 cells down. "They say he knows exactly how to end each species in the most efficient way." Guard Smith paused, his face betraying no emotion as he listened to the whispers. The prisoners immediately fell silent. When he moved on, the conversations resumed in even quieter tones. In the common area where prisoners were allowed to gather for 1 hour each day, the topic dominated all discussions. Leaf, a plant-based prisoner with bark-like skin, shared stories he'd heard from other facilities. "Humans," Leaf said, his leaves trembling. "They're different from other species. During the Centauri Wars, a single human battalion held off an entire Mechlord army. They don't feel fear like we do. They can ignore pain that would disable most species." Blue listened intently, his crystal structure absorbing every vibration of sound. He remembered the stories his own people told about humans, their unpredictability, their ability to survive in almost any environment, their strange mix of cruelty and compassion. That night, as the artificial lights dimmed to simulate night cycle, Blue couldn't help but think about his situation. He knew he was innocent. The weapons had been planted on his ship by someone else. But in the current political climate, with tensions high between the Council and the rebel forces, his protests had fallen on deaf ears. The next morning, the prison buzzed with nervous energy. 2 more guards had arrived, both human, their presence adding to the growing anxiety. They spoke in low voices about preparation procedures and special containment protocols. "The executioner arrives tomorrow," announced Guard Smith during the morning meal distribution. His words sent a wave of terror through the cell block. Blue noticed how even the most hardened prisoners seemed to shrink into themselves. That day, the prisoners shared more stories about humans. They talked about human warfare, about their strange ability to form bonds with almost any species, about their ruthless efficiency when given a task. Some stories seemed impossible. Humans surviving in vacuum for short periods, humans continuing to fight with broken bones, humans outsmarting the most advanced AI systems. As night fell again, Blue watched the storm clouds through the small window in his cell. Lightning illuminated the prison yard in brief, bright flashes. Tomorrow, he would meet the human who would end his life. The thought made his crystalline body vibrate at frequencies that would have shattered lesser materials. In the darkness, he heard Rock whispering a prayer to ancient silicon gods. Wind had compressed herself into the smallest possible space in her chamber. Even Leaf had pulled his branches in tight, trying to become as small as possible. The last thing Blue saw before the night cycle began was Guard Smith's face as he made his final rounds. For a moment, Blue thought he saw something like sympathy in the human's eyes, but that had to be his imagination. After all, what could a human know about mercy? Tomorrow, They would all find out exactly what humans were capable of. The executioner was coming, and with him, they believed, came the end of their stories. They had no way of knowing that their story was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would change their view of humans forever. The morning of the executioner's arrival brought an eerie silence to cell block D7. Even the usual humming of the prison's environmental systems seemed muted, as if the facility itself held its breath in anticipation. James Walker stepped off the transport ship, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. He wore simple black clothing rather than the elaborate uniforms preferred by most Galactic Council officials. A single metal case hung at his side, its contents unknown, but dreaded by all who saw it. Guard Smith met him at the landing pad, standing straight and professional despite the harsh wind that whipped across the moon's surface. "Sir, welcome to Kepler 4 Maximum Security Facility. We've prepared everything according to your specifications." Walker nodded, his weather-worn face revealing nothing. His eyes, though, took in everything. The guard positions, the security cameras, the pattern of patrol drones in the sky. He'd spent 15 years in this line of work, and attention to detail had kept him alive. Inside the facility's processing center, Walker reviewed the prisoner files on a holographic display. 12 condemned, each from a different species, each with their own unique biological requirements for containment and, supposedly, execution. "Interesting cases," Walker muttered, his first words since arrival. His voice was surprisingly soft for someone of his reputation. "I'll need to interview each prisoner personally. Standard procedure." The facility director, a tall robotic being designated as Unit 7, processed this request. Unusual. Previous executioners simply reviewed the biological data. "I'm not previous executioners," Walker replied, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for discussion. The director's optical sensors flickered, the machine equivalent of a shrug, and authorized the interviews. As Walker walked through the prison corridors, conversations died and eyes followed his movement. The prisoners pressed against their cell barriers, trying to get a glimpse of the human they'd heard so many stories about. In the guard break room, Walker overheard snippets of conversation about him. "They say he once executed an entire pirate crew single-handedly," whispered one guard to another. 15 different species, each one requiring a different method. Walker allowed these rumors to circulate. Fear had its uses, and reputation was a tool like any other. But those who looked closely might have noticed how his eyes lingered on certain details: the positioning of security cameras, the patrol patterns of the guards, the maintenance schedules posted on the wall. During the facility tour, Walker paid special attention to the execution chamber. It was a sterile white room with adaptable equipment to handle any species. The walls could adjust their molecular structure to contain gas-based beings. The floor could generate magnetic fields strong enough to hold silicon-based life forms. Even energy beings could be contained and terminated here. "The chamber can be reconfigured in seconds," Unit 7 explained proudly. "Maximum efficiency for multiple executions." Walker walked the chamber's perimeter, his footsteps echoing. He paused at each piece of equipment, studying it with an expert's eye. "I'll need to test everything personally," he said. "No room for error in this work." As day shifted to night, Walker settled into his assigned quarters. Through his window, he could see cell block D7, illuminated by security lights against the dark sky. He opened his metal case, revealing not execution tools, but rather a collection of data pads and scanning equipment. Guard Smith brought him the detailed schedule for the next day's interviews. "The prisoners are terrified," Smith mentioned, watching Walker's reaction carefully. "Your reputation precedes you." Walker looked up from his work. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that didn't match the stories told about him. But it passed so quickly that Smith couldn't be sure he'd seen it at all. "Fear," Walker said quietly, "can be useful, but it's not always what it seems." He turned back to his work, a clear dismissal. As Smith left, Walker pulled out one more item from his case, a small device that would scan for surveillance equipment. Once he confirmed his quarters were truly private, he began his real work for the night. The execution might be scheduled for the end of the week, but James Walker had other plans, plans that would shake the very foundation of the Galactic Council itself. Outside, the storm clouds gathered again over Kepler-4, while 12 prisoners tried to sleep, unaware that their supposed executioner was about to change their fate forever. The interview room was deliberately intimidating. Stark white walls, a single table, and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Walker sat in one, his black clothing a sharp contrast against the sterile environment, as the guards brought in the first prisoner. Blue, the crystalline being, entered with a visible tremor running through his mineral structure. His natural glow had dimmed to almost nothing, a sign of extreme stress in his species. The guards secured him to the chair and left, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. "Do you know why I interview prisoners before execution?" Walker asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Blue's crystalline form vibrated in response to the unexpected tone. 2. To determine the most efficient method. Blue's voice came out as a musical chime, strained with fear. Walker leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about the weapons they found on your ship." I told them at the trial. "They weren't mine. I transport medical crystals between systems. Someone must have planted them during my stop at Station K9. Instead of dismissing the claim, Walker pulled out a datapad. "Station K9. That's interesting. The station logs show your ship was there for exactly 3 hours, barely enough time for a standard cargo check." He paused, making a note. "Who handled your inspection?" Blue's inner light flickered with surprise at the unexpected line of questioning. "An inspector named Granite. He insisted on a private inspection, said it was new protocol." Walker's eyes narrowed slightly. "There is no Inspector Granite registered at Station K9. Throughout the day, Walker interviewed each prisoner. With Rock, the silicon-based life form, he discussed the supposedly stolen military plans found in his data core. With Wind, the gas-based entity, he explored the details of her alleged sabotage of a council mining operation. Each interview followed a similar pattern. Walker would ask precise, detailed questions about their cases, often revealing inconsistencies in the official records. The prisoners, initially terrified, began to show confusion at his approach. During his interview with Leaf, the plant-based prisoner, Walker noticed something crucial. "You say the encrypted messages were found in your root system, but according to your species biology, your root system completely regenerates every 60 days. These messages were supposedly there for 6 months." Leaf's leaves rustled in agitation. "That's what my defender tried to explain, but the court wouldn't listen. They said human evidence confirmed it." Walker's face darkened at this. "Human evidence? There were no humans involved in your case according to these records." By the end of the day, Walker had filled several data pads with notes. In his private quarters, he began connecting the dots. Every case had similar elements: rushed trials, convenient evidence, and most importantly, gaps in the official documentation that nobody had bothered to question. A knock at his door interrupted his work. It was Guard Smith, bringing the evening meal. "Sir, the prisoners seem different after their interviews." Walker looked up from his notes. "Different how?" "Less afraid. Some are even talking about filing appeals." Smith hesitated. "Should I report this to Director Unit 7? "No need," Walker replied carefully. "Fear serves its purpose, but so does hope." He paused, studying the guard's face. "Tell me, Smith, how long have you worked here?" 3 years, long enough to see things that don't add up." Walker nodded slowly. "And what do you do with those observations?" "Keep them to myself. Usually." Smith met Walker's gaze steadily. "Until now." A moment of understanding passed between the two humans. Walker pulled out a clean datapad. "Tell me everything you've noticed. Every inconsistency, every unusual pattern." As Smith began to speak, Walker's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. The conspiracy was larger than he'd initially suspected. reaching deep into the Galactic Council itself. These 12 prisoners weren't just random victims. They were carefully chosen targets, each one a potential threat to someone's power. Outside the facility, another storm was brewing, but inside, something else was taking shape. The prisoners had expected their interviews to be the beginning of their end. Instead, they had become the first step toward uncovering a truth that would shake the foundations of galactic justice. Walker knew he was running out of time. The official execution date was only days away, and he still had to figure out how to save 12 innocent lives while exposing a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of power. But for the first time since arriving, he allowed himself a small smile. After all, humans had a reputation for doing the impossible. The facility's night cycle provided perfect cover for Walker's covert investigation. While most guards patrolled the outer perimeters, he made his way through the dimly lit administrative section, his security clearance granting him access to areas typically off-limits even to senior staff. The records room hummed with the soft whir of data servers. Walker plugged a small device into the main terminal, bypassing the standard security protocols. Years of experience had taught him that official records often held secrets in their metadata. Timestamps that didn't match, authorization codes used at impossible times, data modified by users who shouldn't have had access. Just as I thought, he muttered, scanning through files. Each prisoner's case had been processed through the same administrative terminal on Station K9, despite occurring months apart in different sectors of space. The digital signature belonged to a Judge Maxwell, but the coding pattern was wrong. A noise in the corridor made him freeze. Footsteps approached, then passed. Walker continued his work, pulling up personnel files for the inspection teams involved in each arrest. The same names appeared repeatedly, under slightly different spellings, a trick used to avoid pattern recognition algorithms. His data pad beeped softly, indicating a match with information he'd gathered during the interviews. The weapons found on Blue's ship matched exactly with those from 3 other smuggling cases in different sectors. Not similar weapons, identical ones, down to the serial numbers. Sloppy, Walker thought. They never expected anyone to look this closely. In his quarters later that night, Walker compiled his findings. The conspiracy was elegant in its simplicity. Identify potential threats to certain council members' interests, plant evidence, arrange arrests through controlled inspection points, and ensure cases were assigned to specific judges. Guard Smith arrived with more information. I checked the maintenance logs like you asked. Every time a prisoner arrived, the security camera in Docking Bay 3 experienced technical difficulties for exactly 17 minutes. Walker nodded, long enough to plant evidence or modify cargo manifests. Who has access to those cameras? That's the interesting part, Smith replied. The maintenance chief is related to Council Member Drake's primary aide. Walker added this to his growing web of connections. Council Member Drake, the same one who had recently proposed expanding council authority over independent trading routes. The same routes these prisoners had frequently used. The next day, while conducting his preparation inspection of the execution chamber, Walker discovered another piece of the puzzle. The chamber's systems had been secretly modified. Instead of standard execution procedures, the equipment was set to completely destroy all organic and inorganic matter, leaving no evidence for future investigation. During his scheduled prisoner interviews, Walker carefully collected DNA and material samples from each inmate. That night, he ran tests using equipment hidden in his case. The results confirmed his suspicions. Trace elements in the planted evidence didn't match the supposed origins. The weapons on Blue's ship contained mineral compositions from an entirely different sector than claimed. But time was running out. Walker intercepted a coded transmission to Director Unit 7. Proceed with schedule. No delays authorized. The executions were being pushed forward. In his quarters, Walker laid out his evidence, documented inconsistencies, impossible coincidences, manipulated records, and physical proof of evidence tampering. Enough to expose the conspiracy, if he could get it to the right people. The question was, Who could he trust? The Galactic Council was compromised. Local authorities were under council control, and independent investigators could be bought off. He needed someone with both the power to act and the integrity to use it properly. A message from Smith interrupted his thoughts. Director Unit 7 is requesting execution chamber prep for tomorrow morning. They're moving up the schedule. Walker's jaw tightened. They must have detected his investigation. Now he had less than 12 hours to save 12 innocent lives and expose a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of galactic government. He began packing his equipment, mind racing through possibilities. The normal channels were closed to him. That left only one option. The kind of solution that had given humans their reputation for unpredictability. As storm clouds gathered again over the facility, Walker made his decision. If the system wouldn't provide justice, he would have to work outside it. After all, he hadn't spent years building his fearsome reputation as an executioner just to let innocent people die. Tomorrow would change everything, if he survived long enough to implement his plan. The pre-dawn hours found Walker in his quarters, making final preparations. He'd spent the night transforming his simple black clothing into makeshift armor, reinforced with stolen maintenance panels. His reputation would be his best weapon. No one would expect the feared executioner to become a liberator. Guard Smith entered quietly, his face tense. Director Unit 7 has ordered full security protocols for immediate execution. They're not waiting for official procedures. Walker nodded grimly. Time to move. Did you make the changes to the security systems? Done. Camera loops are set for the next hour. But the automated defense systems are still online. I couldn't access them. Walker pulled out a small device from his case. Don't worry about those. Get to your position and wait for my signal. The prison was eerily quiet as Walker made his way to cell block D7. His security clearance allowed him to move freely, and guards stepped aside respectfully as he passed. None of them realized that the case he carried contained not execution tools, but equipment for his most daring rescue. At the cell block entrance, he nodded to the guards. Pre-execution procedures. Clear the area. His commanding tone left no room for question. The guards quickly departed, leaving him alone with the prisoners. Blue was the first to notice something different. The human's stance had changed. He moved more like a soldier than an executioner. When Walker approached his cell, Blue's crystalline structure vibrated with confusion rather than fear. Listen carefully, Walker said quietly, his voice carrying to all cells. You're all innocent. I have proof. But right now, we have about 50 minutes to get you out of here before they realize what's happening. The cell block erupted in whispers. Rock's gravelly voice cut through the noise. Why should we trust you? Because in 10 minutes, Director Unit 7 will order your immediate execution. No procedures, no witnesses. They know I've discovered their conspiracy. This is your only chance. Walker worked quickly, using his device to override each cell's security systems. The prisoners emerged cautiously, still uncertain whether to trust their supposed executioner. Stay close. Move only when I signal. Walker led them through the corridors, using his knowledge of guard patterns and security blind spots. When they encountered patrols, he stepped forward confidently, transferring prisoners to execution chamber. The guards saluted and moved on. They were halfway to the maintenance tunnels when the alarms began blaring. Director Unit 7's metallic voice echoed through the facility. Security breach detected. All prisoners to be terminated immediately. Authorization. Council Priority 1. Run, Walker commanded, dropping his official demeanor. He pulled out his device and triggered the emergency containment protocols. But he'd reprogrammed them to seal off the pursuing guards instead of the escaping prisoners. The group raced through maintenance corridors, Walker leading them through a route he'd memorized from stolen facility maps. Behind them, security robots and armed guards mobilized, but found themselves trapped by their own security systems. At a junction, they met Guard Smith, who directed them to a service elevator. Docking bay is clear. Transport's ready. But as they approached the bay, Director Unit 7 appeared with a squad of elite security units. The robot's optical sensors glowed red. Executioner Walker, your actions constitute treason against the Galactic Council. Walker stepped forward, positioning himself between the prisoners and the security forces. The only treason here is framing innocent people to cover up Council corruption. Lethal force authorized, Unit 7 announced. The security units raised their weapons. What happened next became legend in the prison. Walker triggered his final surprise, an electromagnetic pulse device hidden in his modified clothing. The security units dropped. Their systems scrambled. Unit 7, specially shielded, remained functioning, but was slowed enough for Walker to engage him directly. The prisoners watched in amazement as the human fought the advanced robot director. Walker moved with practiced precision, using the director's strength against him. He had studied the robot's design specs during his investigation and knew exactly where to strike. The ship. Go, Walker shouted as he grappled with Unit 7. The prisoners hesitated for a moment, then ran for the waiting transport, led by Smith. Just as Unit 7 gained the upper hand, pinning Walker against a wall, Blue returned. The crystalline being focused his internal energy, creating a brilliant flash that overloaded the director's optical sensors. Walker broke free, landing a decisive blow that finally disabled the robot. They raced to the transport ship, where the others waited. As Walker initiated the launch sequence, facility defenses came online. Anti-aircraft weapons targeted them, but Walker's earlier sabotage had altered their targeting systems. The shots went wide as they accelerated into the atmosphere. Course set for the Independent Judicial Station in the Arcturus sector, Walker announced as they broke orbit. That's where we'll present our evidence. The prisoners, still breathing heavily from their escape, looked at their unlikely savior with newfound respect. Blue spoke for all of them. You risked everything to save us. Why? Walker checked their pursuit vectors before answering. Because executing innocent people isn't justice. And humans aren't just good at ending lives. We're good at saving them too. As their ship accelerated to light speed, leaving the prison moon behind, alarms were already sounding throughout the Galactic Council. The most notorious executioner in the sector had just become its most wanted fugitive, and he had evidence that would shake the Council to its core. Smith managed a small smile from the co-pilot's seat. You know they'll hunt us across the galaxy for this. Walker nodded, already plotting their next moves. Let them try. They're about to learn why humans have a reputation for being unpredictable. Behind them, 12 grateful prisoners began to understand that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, even from the person you thought was coming to end your life. What will you do now? Blue asked, his crystal structure reflecting the starlight. Walker smiled slightly. There are probably other innocent people out there, wrongly condemned. They need someone to look deeper, to question the official story. You're not going back to being an executioner. Rock rumbled. No, I'm thinking of becoming an investigator for the independent judiciary. Someone needs to make sure justice is served, not just sentences. The High Arbiter approached their group. Your actions have changed many things, Mr. Walker. The Council is implementing new safeguards, and your example has inspired others to question and investigate rather than simply obey. And it's changed how we see humans. Blue added, we thought your species was just good at ending things. Now we know you're also protectors, seekers of truth. Walker gazed out at the stars. Humans are complex. We can be whatever we need to be. Executioners or saviors, fighters or peacekeepers. What matters is the choices we make. As news of the conspiracy's exposure spread throughout the galaxy, the story of the human executioner who became a savior became legendary. It showed that justice could prevail even in the darkest times, and that help could come from the most unexpected sources. The 12 former prisoners went their separate ways, cleared of all charges and compensated for their wrongful imprisonment. But they maintained contact with Walker, who had transformed from their greatest fear into their greatest ally. Years later, When people told stories about humans in the galaxy, they didn't just talk about their strength or their unpredictability. They also told the story of James Walker, the executioner who chose justice over duty, and in doing so, changed the course of galactic history. The tale became a reminder that true justice requires more than just following orders. It requires the courage to question, the wisdom to investigate, and the strength to stand up for what's right, even when facing the most powerful forces in the galaxy. And somewhere out among the stars, Walker continued his work, ensuring that no more innocent beings would face execution for crimes they didn't commit. Because sometimes, the person you fear most might turn out to be your only hope for salvation. The independent judicial station hung like a silver star in the Arcturus sector, its distinctive ring-shaped structure representing the scales of justice. Walker's transport ship approached cautiously, transmitting the special access codes he'd obtained during his years of work. Independent Station Control. This is James Walker, Priority Code Alpha 70. Requesting emergency landing and immediate audience with the High Arbiter. There was a tense pause before the response came. Codes verified. However, Mr. Walker, you are currently flagged as a fugitive by the Galactic Council. That's why we're here, Walker replied. Invoking right of evidence, Section 31 of the Independent Judiciary Act. We have proof of council corruption and wrongful imprisonment. The docking bay doors opened slowly, admitting their ship. As they landed, they could see the station's security forces surrounding them, not hostile, but cautious. The High Arbiter herself, a tall being composed of pure energy contained within a judicial robe, waited with her staff. Walker led his group out, each prisoner carrying part of the evidence they'd gathered. Blue's crystalline structure now glowed with hope rather than fear. Rock moved with newfound confidence, while wind swirled in her containment field with anticipation. High Arbiter, Walker bowed slightly. I bring you 12 innocent beings and evidence of a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of the Galactic Council. The next several hours were spent in the station's main judicial chamber. Walker presented their case methodically, displaying the evidence he'd gathered. He showed the manipulated records, the impossible coincidences, the doctored evidence, and the connection to Council member Drake's expansion plans. Guard Smith testified about the patterns he'd observed at the prison. Each prisoner told their story, their testimonies building a clear picture of systematic corruption. Blue's case proved particularly compelling when Walker demonstrated how the weapon's mineral composition couldn't have come from their supposed origin. The High Arbiter's energy form pulsed with concern as she reviewed the evidence. This is most disturbing, but we must proceed carefully. The Council will not take these accusations lightly. As if on cue, the station's communication system activated. Council member Drake himself appeared on the main screen, his aristocratic features twisted with anger. High Arbiter, you are harboring dangerous fugitives. We demand their immediate surrender. Councilor Drake, the High Arbiter's voice resonated with authority. We are reviewing evidence of serious misconduct within the Council. These beings have invoked ancient rights of judicial protection. Drake's face darkened. This is an internal Council matter. Your interference will have consequences. Walker stepped forward. Like the consequences faced by these innocent people, or the consequences of your illegal expansion plans. Before Drake could respond, Walker transmitted one final piece of evidence. Financial records showing massive profits from the sea's trade routes, all flowing through shell companies linked to Drake's family. The Council member's image flickered as he realized his position. These are fabrications. You cannot trust a human who betrayed his own position as executioner. I never betrayed my position, Walker replied calmly. My job was to serve justice. That's exactly what I'm doing. The High Arbiter raised her hand for silence. I have seen enough. By the authority of the independent judiciary, I hereby declare all 12 prisoners innocent of their charged crimes. Furthermore, I am opening a full investigation into Council member Drake and all associated parties. The chamber erupted in celebration. Blue's crystal structure radiated brilliant colors of joy, while wind swirled in elaborate patterns of happiness. Rock's silicon surface sparkled with emotion, and Leaf's branches swayed in celebration. Over the next few weeks, the investigation expanded. Other victims of the conspiracy came forward. The evidence Walker had gathered proved instrumental in exposing a network of corruption that had been growing within the council for years. 1 month later, Walker stood with his former prisoners on the observation deck of the Independent Station, watching as council member Drake and his conspirators were led into custody.